What is good, everybody? I appreciate y'all tuning back in right here on the Blue Bloods for our Week 9 college football mailbag. So if you're new, man, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to hit the like button as well. But if you're new, what we're gonna do is we had some subscriber submitted questions already that we're gonna break down. Here on my right, we're gonna break down the Walter Payton Award race, which is given to the best FCS player in the country last year. Cole Kelly from Southeastern Louisiana won that award, and it's pretty much like the Heisman of the FCS. And they were also going to have a hot seat watch. So one of the user submitted questions was, which college football coach can you see losing his job next? As we just saw Texas Tech this week fire Matt Wells, even after I believe he had a 5-3 record this year. They decided to move in another direction, which follows LSU, UConn, USC, and there's a lot of jobs opening right now. And then finally, we're going to talk QB1 for the 2022 NFL draft, just a real preliminary discussion with that. Now that Spencer Rattler's kind of out of the running, who was really the consensus, number one pick potentially, we need to break down who the I guess new candidates are. So I gave y'all 4 names that I think could potentially be the number one quarterback taken off the board. And of course, as we do every week, the last 30, 45 minutes of the show will be dedicated to all y'all tuned in, where y'all can ask any and all questions about college football. And we could talk the biggest storylines, questions that y'all have at the end of the show. But let's get right into it, man. The Walter Payton Award race. And so, as I said, for people who are just now tuning in, this is given to the best FCS player in the country year in and year out. So this is like the FCS Heisman. I know there were some people wondering, back in the day, Steve McNair had some Heisman hype and so on and so forth, but they kind of made this Walter Payton Award to give these FCS guys a fair shot at a big award that kind of gets at all their accomplishments throughout the season. So for me, I'm going to start out with 2 honorable mentions because I think this is a 2-person race. And it's really not even close after that. So the first honorable mention for me for the Walter Payton Award would be Pierre Strong, South Dakota State running back. He was one of the finalists last year. He's already number 3 in the country in terms of rushing yards for the season. He's second, I believe, in yards per game for rushing, and he has some of the most touchdowns for a running back in the FCS right now, over 10 rushing touchdowns. This guy is a catalyst for the runner-ups for last season. He has South Dakota State in a position to make another deep playoff run. So for me, the first honorable mention for the Walter Payton Award would be Pierre Strong from South Dakota State, the running back, even though this quarterback is generally a quarterback award. The other honorable mention that I have, a guy that I think a lot of people have overlooked this year in the FCS, is Cameron Ward, Incarnate Word quarterback, who has been one of the top quarterbacks in the country. He's top 5 in passing yards, top 5 in passing touchdowns. He's top 15 in passing efficiency, and he's thrown for over 300 yards in every single game other than a week 2 blowout against Prairie View A&M, which they kind of pulled him early because they were just dominating Prairie View at that point. And then he's also thrown 2 or more touchdowns in every single game, have 3, 4 touchdown games. And he really has Incarnate Word with a shot to make a real run at the FCS playoffs. They were number 22 in the latest poll after they suffered a tough upset loss to McNeese this past weekend, but he still threw for over 455 yards that game. And in case you guys aren't familiar, since the Southland has been kind of decimated by teams leaving, each of these teams are playing multiple times. So he dominated McNeese, and they got a big win a few weeks ago. And so McNeese, the second time around, really gave him a run for his money, but they had a lot of film, and they also got to really put him to the test the second time around. So for me, I think Ward has really earned an honorable mention here for the Walter Payton Award. But anybody tuned in who watches any national, I guess, FCS football knows who the top 2 candidates for this award are. and they're the two best quarterbacks in the FCS, and it's not even a realistic conversation at this point. And that's Eric Berrier for Eastern Washington at quarterback, and then Cole Kelly, Southeastern Louisiana's quarterback. These guys were the finalists last season, and Berrier lost the award to Cole Kelly by like eight votes, I believe. It was something extremely close like that. But then also Eric Berrier won the FCS National Player of the Year award last year and beat out Cole Kelly for that one. So this is really kind of like the rubber match for who is the best quarterback and the best player at the FCS level. And it's been a Berrier Kelly race almost all season long. And I have a real tough time of any FCS player, quarterback, anything challenging Berrier or Kelly for that throne of best quarterback in the FCS and or the Walter Payton Award this season. But let's start with the guy who I think right now is in second place, and that's Cole Kelly, Southeastern Louisiana's quarterback. He's completed almost 75% of his passes this year for over 2,700 yards, 26 passing touchdowns, 8 rushing, and only 5 interceptions for the year. He's top 3 in passing yards, top 3 in passing touchdowns, top 2 in efficiency, and also leads the FCS in completion percentage. Cole Kelly has thrown for over 340 in every single game this season, guys, while throwing for 3 or more touchdowns in every single game this far as well. I mean, that is elite level production. And on top of that, he's so efficient because he's completed over 65% of his passes in every game this season thus far. It has been an elite level production down there in Louisiana. And on top of that, he has Southeastern Louisiana ranked top 8 in the country right now in this latest FCS poll, and could really find themselves with a top 8 seed in a bye week come FCS playoffs time. Then tomorrow we're dropping our interview with Sam Herder from Hero Sports. We have a midseason FCS review coming out. He mentioned that this team, due to Kelly's performance, is really a dark horse to win the national title this year because of the elite production that they have had, this season. And then on top of that, you look at his Houston Baptist game where he puts up 61 points. He completes over 80% of his passes for 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, and has an over 200 quarterback rating. It's elite. And then also on top of that, he's a real NFL prospect because he's 6'7", 260. Like, he is the guy, and you have no concerns about hand size, weight, height, arm strength. Cole Kelly is the complete package, and he's really putting it together this season for Southeastern Louisiana. But the favorite, and listen, if you're going to ask me right now, I think the race for the Walter Payton Award is pretty much over, especially if Berrier has a big performance or two. But Eric Berrier from Eastern Washington, the quarterback spot, for me, it is hands down, no question, the best quarterback at FCS. And this season, he has been putting up just like rookie mode NCAA 14 stats right now. I mean, he's completing over 66% of his passes for over 3,300 yards already, 30 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing with only 6 interceptions. He leads the country in passing yards, leads the country in passing touchdowns, is the number 1 passer in the FCS in efficiency, and is in his top 6 in completion percentage. I mean, nobody in the country, even FBS, really even has an argument to be above Eric Berrier right now statistically in the country. And he was motivated he said on this show, the interviews on our channel, he said he felt snubbed last season when the Walter Payton Award was given away. So he's really come back and had an elite season this year. When you look at what he's done this season, over 240 yards in every single game this season while throwing 2 or more touchdowns in every single game. Also, just the most ridiculous stat ever, 3 games already with over 500 yards, and he has 2 games already with 6 or more touchdowns. In 3 of those games, he has 70% or more completion percentage. I mean, him and Cole Kelly are setting a type of pace that that's why I say I don't think anybody in the country other than Cole Kelly and Eric Berrier even have a realistic shot at winning this award. And then on top of that, you see some of these quarterbacks attempt 50, 60 passes a game. Eric Berrier has put up these stats with never attempting more than 45 passes in a game. and he has 3 games with a 200 or more passer rating, which leads to FCS as well. And when you look at what could happen, because with this award, kind of like the Heisman, you want to have the stage to do it on. Eric Berrier had the stage where Montana Eastern Washington was flexed to ESPN2 just a few weeks ago. He did it in prime time on the biggest stage, beat Montana, which was the number 4 team in the country. And now Eastern Washington is in line to receive a top 8 seed in the FCS playoffs this season and has the Eagles ranked number 7 in the latest top 25 poll. But they did suffer their first loss this weekend to Weber State by 1 point. It was their first home loss in I believe 15 games over a season of winning on the red turf. They finally got brought to an end by Weber State, but they still have a lot of big games ahead. And when you look at his best game, kind of similar to Kelly, it was that Idaho win where they won 71-21. Berrier completed 74% of his passes, threw for over 600 yards on 35 attempts, had 7 touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, and had a 284 passer rating for that game. So when you look at Eric Berrier and Cole Kelly, I just think because of the gaudy stats, because of how good the Big Sky is this year up there in the Northwest, you've got to give Eric Berrier the favorite right now to win the Walter Payton Award. But then you got Cole Kelly nipping on his heels right now down there at Southeastern Louisiana. I just don't think any other quarterback player in the country can even touch these two guys in terms of statistics, in terms of having their teams in the playoff race, and in terms of what they're doing on the football field. These two guys are by far the best 2 players in college football right now. So those are my candidates for the Walter Payton Award. I had Eric Berrier 1, Cole Kelly 2, Cameron Ward 3, and Pierre Strong, South Dakota State running back 4 as my honorable mentions. But moving on here, we got to talk. I was asked a question on Twitter. Shout out to everyone who sends us in questions before the show. But the question was, who could be the next college football head coach to be fired this season? We've already seen USC make a move after just 4 weeks right now, and they moved off of Clay Helton, and now that there's rumors that Tomlin could take the job, James Franklin. There's a lot of rumors on who could take that job. And then you also saw LSU move off of Coach Ed Orgeron. They have an agreement where he'll coach out the rest of the season, but he'll be on his way out after the year. And then on top of that, Texas Tech fires Matt Wells this past week. 5-3 record, already kicking the can down the road. So we'll see how that works out for them. Washington State had to fire their head coach due to his vaccine status. So there are a lot of great jobs open right now in college football. But as we know, we haven't even hit November yet. So I would imagine that the level of jobs that open up are going to be this is going to be one of the most insane seasons for head coaching changes I think we've seen in a very, very long time. Now, for me, I would say I'll give y'all 3 names. I don't want to, spend too much time. I want to take y'all's live questions. I think you have to look at Justin Fuente at Virginia Tech. You have to look at Scott Frost possibly at Nebraska, and then Manny Diaz at Miami would probably be my top 3 picks right now for coaches who potentially would be on the hottest seat as we enter this week. You look at Virginia Tech. They opened up with a giant win over UNC. I mean, a lot of people thought Virginia Tech could shock some people. They get ranked, and then they suffer a huge upset loss the next week. And now they're sitting there, only 3 wins on the season. They're on a 3-game losing streak right now. And the biggest thing is there's insider reports. Shout out to 247 Sports for this. There's insider reports that he has a very, quote, this is the quote they use, frosty relationship with all the boosters and people in high places at Virginia Tech. And when you look at the level of success that program has had over the recent years, you would imagine Virginia Tech feels like, especially in a year like this where Wake Forest and Pitt are the teams to beat in the ACC, that Virginia Tech would be in that conversation. So the fact that they're still struggling under Fuente, the project for them just hasn't worked. And I would imagine if Virginia Tech doesn't, at least get to 7-5, 8-4 this year, I would imagine Justin Fuente could be a name that you guys see be on the open market. The other job I mentioned, Manny Diaz at Miami. This is an interesting one because there's some financial considerations you also have to take into account. Miami doesn't, the buyout's big, and the rumor is they don't know if they're going to have the money right now to make a move. So they could be stuck with Diaz, and he also could have possibly saved his job with a huge comeback win over NC State this past weekend. But when you look at what's ahead for them, they have some extremely, extremely tough games ahead. And then apparently a lot of the boosters, based on some people I talked to, really still have a sour taste in their mouth on how Alabama beat them to open the season. If you watch any type of college football, Alabama absolutely embarrassed the Hurricanes week one, and that offense went up and down the field, and everyone got banged up, and the offense had no explosiveness, and it got ugly before the game even got going for Miami. So Manny Diaz is someone who a lot of people right now surrounding Miami are out on. Now, the key factor, the reason I didn't mention him first is because I don't know if they're going to have the financial situation together to actually move off of Diaz at this point. And so Manny Diaz is someone to look at moving forward. And then, of course, this guy's been on the hot seat pretty much since he's got the job, it feels like, and that's Scott Frost at Nebraska. Now, the one positive note for him this year is that every game that he has coached in and Nebraska's played in against top teams has been relatively close. A one-score loss to Michigan, a 3-point loss to Michigan State in overtime, a one-score loss to Oklahoma. They've had some chances to win the game. But at the same time, that Illinois loss really, really rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way this season. And I personally believe that Nebraska is looking at like, man, look at how good the Big Ten is this year. Michigan State's in the top 10. Michigan's at 6. You have Ohio State rebounding into the top 5. You had Penn State as the top 10 team all season until last week when they got upset. Wisconsin's on a down year, but they've been historically, in recent memory, very, very successful. Minnesota was a top 10 team just 2 seasons ago. Northwestern's having a bad year, but they've been to 2 out of the last 3 Big Ten championships. And then you're like, well, damn, like Nebraska is one of these, programs that a lot of people think are a blue blood program, and they haven't been relevant in the Big Ten conversation since Scott Frost took the job. And the problem could be, it's really hard to recruit at Nebraska now. And at the height of their reign, you had the partial academic qualifier rule where Nebraska, in terms of national standards, was using that partial qualifier rule to help get a lot of talent into that program. And when that was taken away, they weren't able to recruit at such a high level as they did in the Tom Osborne years. So that's something else to look for. They need someone for me that has a winning culture behind him already, knows what it feels like, knows how to build one. And they also need someone who can recruit, because Nebraska is not a state where you're going to have a lot of in-state talent. So you're going to have to reach down to Texas. You're going to have to reach nationally to Florida, nationally to California, nationally to Georgia. You've got to go over to Ohio and steal some kids. And you're going to have to recruit against the best of the best in the country, because you just can't home pluck talent out of Nebraska like you could when Scott Frost was down in Orlando at UCF. So I think that's been the biggest difference. The biggest difference for Scott Frost from UCF to now is, one, the expectations are completely different. And 2, the recruiting is so much harder because everyone in the chat right now knows how easy, not easy, but how much easier it is to recruit the state of Florida when you're a Florida program. That's why all these Florida programs, if you're down in the state of Florida, a lot of people are looking at you like, what exactly are you doing on the recruiting trail? And yeah, Coach Simmons puts it perfectly. Nebraska really recruited California's, the leftovers of that state, and they got a lot of kids based on that partial qualifier rule, and they really won some national titles because of it. And you can go look it up. It's public knowledge. SI did a great piece on it just a few years back. Just look up partial qualifier in Nebraska, and they can show you they had some of the highest percentages of partial qualifiers. And when that rule changed, Nebraska as a program really changed, and it really took a big downturn after those Tom Osborne years. But those would be my 3 candidates for hot seat watch right now in the FBS. Now, if you're looking for FCS, I think, man, I said it before, but I thought Sims at Bethune-Cookman could be on his way out. But I know a lot of people think that he's going to get a reprieve from that job due to all the financial aspects that we saw happen at this all season where they cut millions out of that funding budget. And I think you also got to look at UAPB and Doc Gamble. He's on the hot seat now. I've already been vocal on the roundtable. I think he's going to get one more year at UAPB just because getting to the SWAC championship in the spring really bought you some. I think it bought you like a grace period. Like, okay, you got us to the championship, and we had a lot of transfers out of the program. The SWAC as a whole took a huge step forward as FAMU came in. Jackson State got light years better than they were. You saw Prairie View's emergence. So I think I honestly think UAPB. He bought one more year at UAPB. Now Southern, I already told y'all how I feel about that. Rollins on his way out. I think that I honestly don't even think that's a debate. I talked to, a few people who contacted me on Instagram to talk about it, and I think everybody around Southern who has any type of pull has said Rollins is probably on his way out. Now, who they hire, I can't tell you guys because everyone has a different opinion on the Southern job right now. A lot of people think they should go the celebrity coach route, but if you ask many Southern fans, especially old school Southern fans, they're going to disagree with you and say that program does not want a celebrity coach. So we're gonna have to see which direction they go. But I honestly think Rollins in that interim job would be he's gonna be on the way out. Coach Simmons says Gary Harrell from Jackson State will be at Texas Southern. That's going to be an interesting move. Harrell is a solid coach, and also I really do think if any SWAC jobs that open, especially as Jackson State's offense keeps going, I don't know if he'll take them. I really do think TC Taylor is going to be a candidate for a lot of jobs, especially jobs who want to hire offensive minded head coaches. TC Taylor is going to be a huge, huge candidate. And I know some people think Zach Rossi could potentially even be from Southern offensive coordinator. He could be a candidate for some big time jobs. So we'll see there. And then also Donald Ely at Alabama State. His seat is as hot as ever. But winning the Magic City Classic this weekend could really go a long way in determining whether he keeps his job or not. So that's going to be a huge matchup that we'll be previewing right here on the Blue Bloods. But last topic before I take y'all's questions live about anything college football, we're gonna go to the NFL draft. And yeah, I know it's October 26th, but I was asked about it, and I give the subscribers what they want. I was asked on with with Radler kind of dropping out of the race because he got benched and he's probably going into the transfer portal. Who are the candidates to be a real QB1 moving forward for the NFL draft? And so I wanted to give y'all 4 names that I think have the potential to be QB1. And I'll go from 4 to 1. I ranked them. 4th is Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. This is a guy who is the winningest quarterback in college football currently in the FBS. He's leading Cincinnati to a number 2 ranking. He's a dark horse in the Heisman race right now. He's a dual threat guy, but he has NFL prototypical size. He has the arm strength. And so for me, the NFL loves experience, loves size, and you can see they want some guys who can move in the pocket and make plays. Desmond Ridder is that guy. Now, he is going to probably be knocked because of the conference he played in, because he wasn't at that Power 5 level. But I think Ridder is really going to shine not only at the combine, but also these all-star games when he goes down to the Senior Bowl, when he goes down to possibly the East-West Shrine game. All those type of all-star games, I think, is where Ridder is really, really going to shine. So also Sam Howell, I think, at UNC, as bad of a year as he had, and you're never going to hear me defend the type of year Sam Howell has had, but I really think, and we've seen this multiple times, he's built up enough goodwill right now from the first 2 years of his performance to really still have him on NFL teams' radars. I just don't see how Sam Howell is not a first-round pick, especially when scouts start kind of analyzing how bad his offensive line play was. They are really, really suffering right now in terms of, one, losing both running backs in Michael Carter and Javonte Williams, who are both doing outstanding in the NFL, by the way, and then also losing Diami Brown at wide receiver, and they also lost another one whose name's escaping me, but losing your top 2 wide receivers and top 2 running backs and the offensive line regressing tremendously has really put a damper on Sam Howell. But when you still look at play-to-play mechanics, arm strength, and just playmaking ability outside the pocket, Sam Howell is one of the best in the country, so you still have to give it to him. And EA kind of took my number 2. You see, I thought I was going to be a little original here, EA, so I appreciate you stealing my thunder, but my number 2 quarterback is Kenny Pickett. Listen, we can keep it real with each other on this show. If there's a quarterback in the FBS that has played the best just this season, we're not looking at previous seasons, pedigree, anything like that. If we're looking on the field performance this season, Kenny Pickett is the best quarterback in the country right now. He has played that well. And when you look at how quick he's risen, it kind of reminds you, I'm not comparing him to these guys, but of a Joe Burrow, Zach Wilson, where they just kind of came out of nowhere. Now, the one thing that I have read is that his hand size and has kind of been dissected. But when you look at his height and weight, he's more of a prototypical quarterback than you even like a Sam Howell or a Matt Corral even is. But when you look at how much this offense throws the ball, to only have one interception to this point in the season, I personally think Kenny Pickett has to be considered, especially as you see Pitt just slowly but surely rising through the rankings. And right now, they're my pick to win the ACC, even over Wake Forest, just because I think their defense is much better than what Wake Forest is. But Kenny Pickett, for me, has proven himself as an NFL prospect. And then finally, you got to give it up to him. As much as I'm not a huge, I don't know how well he's going to do in the NFL, but based on what he's done to this point in his career, Matt Corral has to be the number 1 quarterback in this class right now. And it all starts with not only his arm strength, but just his athleticism. You saw how he can carry a team when that team went into Tennessee. They had no run game, really. Everyone was getting banged up. It was a hostile environment. They had the whole throwing bottles, cans, everything on the field. They had a real problem in that game, and he took them out of it not only with his arm, but with his legs. He played very great football while he was injured against LSU last week, and he's going to have the stage to really shine. He had a chance at Alabama and kind of wasted it, but he has a top 20 matchup against Auburn this weekend. He still has some big SEC games ahead of him. And let's just say, look, Bama, Ole Miss, and Auburn are leading the SEC West right now with 1 loss. If Ole Miss can win out and Bama gets upset somewhere along the way, Ole Miss could find their way to Atlanta still. And that will put him up against a great Georgia defense that will give him arguably the biggest stage in the country in the SEC championship against the consensus number 1 defense in the country to really put his talent on full blast. So for me, that is why Matt Corral would be my number 1 pick as of right now. So just to kind of recap, I would have Corral 1, Pickett 2, Sam Howell 3, Desmond Ridder 4. And just as an honorable mention, I would probably put Carson Strong right now from Nevada at 5. And then, other than that, I just think there's a large drop off in terms of the senior class right this second, because a lot of the great quarterbacks are underclassmen right now. I think you would have to maybe even put a Cole Kelly or an Eric Barrier from the FCS level at that 6 and 7 spot right now, because I think that's how far it drops off in terms of the FBS talent. But guys, listen, I'm going to wrap this segment up, but go ahead and comment any questions you have about the SWAC, the FBS, the FCS, a player, a game. We could talk whatever y'all want for the rest of the show. I just wanted to cover those questions since people went out of their way to submit them. So that's how we're going to do the mailbag, is I'll address all the questions that we get on social media, YouTube, everything like that. And then I'll address your guys' question live for the rest of the show. But for me, this NFL quarterback class is probably going to take a large step back from last year. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Last year's draft class is looking really good right now. So I think it's going to take a large step back. But Coach Simmons said, I keep seeing things about the CUSA wanting to get SWAC teams to step up. Yeah, so Coach Simmons, I guess the thing with the CUSA is, they're losing everybody. They lost teams to the Sun Belt. They're going to lose teams to the AAC. The CUSA is on life support right now. And so really and truly, what I would imagine the CUSA wanting to do is so I don't think they're going to try to bring the whole SWAC up. What I've been reading and what I've kind of been hearing, and I'm going to try to reach out to some of the people I know from some of these programs, the CUSA, what they're going to want to do they're going to want to take the best teams from the SWAC. So probably like they. So if I'm the CUSA, I'm taking like a Jackson State, a FAMU, and let's just say an Alcorn. And then I'm going to go to the Southland. I'm going to grab a Southeastern Louisiana. I'm going to grab an Incarnate Word. And then I'm going to try to go to the SoCon and grab their one or two top teams. And so what I would imagine they're going to do is they're going to take all the FCS programs and conferences in their geographical region and just try to skim the top off of each conference and try to, take the best of each conference and bring them up to the next level. Now that's going to be extremely hard to do because I think some of these conferences are very tight knit, and it's going to be extremely hard to convince two or three SWAC teams to pull away from the SWAC and go up to FBS. And also, I'm just a football guy. I can't tell y'all anything about the budgets of these programs, whether the ADs would be down or not. All I'm saying is the CUSA is going to offer the best teams in each conference and see what they can do. And then, I mean, you even have to look at someone like a James Madison as well. But the problem with the CUSA is James Madison's already been in talks with the AAC, already been in talks with the Sun Belt. So they're going to have competition for some of these top FCS teams. And then it's just going to be real hard you got to prove that moving up to FBS level and playing in the CUSA is the best for some of these schools. You got to convince the Jackson State that it's going to be better to move up to the CUSA. You got to convince a FAMU it's better. You got to convince a Southeastern Louisiana it's better. You got to convince an Incarnate Word it's better. And that's where the CUSA is going to struggle. But yeah, Lawrence said that they're down to 5 teams right now in the CUSA. Yeah, Southern Miss made their announcement that they're going to the Sun Belt. And I just want to applaud all these group of 5 conferences for not staying stagnant and letting their conferences get picked apart, because that was the thing a lot of people were worried about when these big FBS conferences started snatching teams left and right. When the Big 12 was like, yeah, we're going to take the top 4 or top 3 teams from the AAC. The AAC didn't stand flat-footed. They were like, well, we're going to go pick this team, and this team up. And so you're going to see a lot of realignment over the next few days. And I think you're also going to see a lot of realignment at the FCS level too. Because let's say the CUSA takes a handful of teams from, the SoCon or the SWAC, or, even the I guess the little bit left in the Southland. I believe the Southland only has 6 teams right now. So the interview with Sam Herder from Hero Sports is dropping tomorrow. We're going to, we talked our FCS midseason review. We talked the SWAC to the playoffs. We talked national title hopes. We talked FAMU to the playoffs. We talked everything you could talk about in terms of FCS football on that episode. He mentioned that the Southland is really going to try to keep those 6 teams they have together. And what they're going to do is try to pick off the top D2 teams. So they're going to offer a West Florida. They're going to offer I believe it's Texas A&M Commerce and things like that. And he said that they did reach out to the SWAC and potentially try to get Prairie View and Texas Southern. And apparently those talks have not progressed, because that's a real tough get, is to ask, a founding member of the SWAC to abandon that conference to come to the Southland, almost like I would say it was almost like a lateral move. Like usually when you get a team to leave a conference, it has to be a step up in competition. Like when you look at some of these OVC teams joining the ASUN, it was because the level of competition was increased in the ASUN, and so they had a better shot at really proving their programs. And also, yeah, Coach Simmons mentioned the WAC as well is another thing, and the ASUN and WAC have that scheduling alliance right this second. So for me, when you look at what the CUSA is doing, they're going to reach out to the best SWAC teams. They're going to probably reach out to the best SoCon teams, the best ASUN teams, and everyone like that. And they're going to try to get the best FCS teams from each Southern Conference to try to move up into the CUSA. Now, whether it happens, I wish I could tell y'all, but I feel like there's a lot more. There's many more factors outside of just, is that program talented enough to compete at the FBS level? There's also money. There's also resources. There's also contracts with certain, organizations and conferences. So that's going to be the CUSA's plan. Now, whether it formalizes, that's another story. And yeah, EA, West Florida football is moving quick. I remember I have a friend who plays linebacker there. I'm going to try to get him on the show after the season. He was on that national championship squad, but they built that program almost like it seemed like overnight. I mean, they were an average D2 program down there in like Pensacola, and then all of a sudden, man, they just make an outstanding run to the national championship. They're knocking off, teams like McNeese in the non-conference. You got to give West Florida their props, and I would imagine if it's not this year, maybe I would say within the next 3 years, they're going to make the move to the FCS, D1 level and join one of these conferences. And I mean, now which one they join would be interesting. So I don't know how you guys feel, and I know there's going to be a lot of takes on this. I personally think with how the SWAC has established their Florida footprint with FAMU and Bethune-Cookman, that getting a West Florida to join wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you're looking to ever expand. But I would imagine right now they'd probably join someone like the SoCon, maybe the CAA, especially if the CAA loses James Madison to a FBS conference. That would be a team that I think every single conference that needs a team is going to reach out to West Florida and be like, man, do you want to come up? Now, again, I don't know their finances, but West Florida's football team is good enough to compete at the FCS level. Underscore said, Blue, if JMU and Sam Houston move up to the FBS, do you think JSU and PV/Alcorn should move up? Man, Underscore, you're gonna try to get me like killed on the live stream. But yeah, I do. I personally think they should try to move up. Now, it depends on what conference. So the only reason that I pushed back this offseason on the whole I guess move up rumors for Jackson State is because people just wanted to throw them in the Big 12. And that's a lazy analysis. That's a lazy argument because there's not a team in the FCS other than maybe North Dakota State that has proven enough on the football field to even think about joining a conference like that. And I don't even think North Dakota State would even consider it. And it's because it's such a different level of grind, like week in and week out. You have to face the top teams in that conference repeatedly. And it's just a huge step up. And there's just not an FCS team that I think is ready to move up to a Power 5 level. And there was a lot of people who were saying that it could happen and this and that. And I was like, I just it's just a lazy analysis. The Big 12 is not something any FCS team wants to do. And you can talk about how weak it is compared to the Power 5, but I promise you, a Kansas, and you can ask, and Coach Simmons is in here who lives in Kansas right now. A Kansas State is not a pushover team. Yes, they might not be in the national title hunt every year, but I promise you, Kansas State's no pushover. I promise you, Oklahoma State's no pushover. Baylor, anything like that. And like, yes, Jackson State is one of the best teams at the FCS level, but the Power Five's a lot. But that's a whole nother rant. But yeah, I do think they should move up. I think if I'm this, that's what I was saying is if you look at the CUSA, why would you not target a JSU, a PV, and Alcorn? The only thing I would say Underscore is that with PV only having one big year of success, because I get told by SWAC fans all the time that, I got told by Southern fans me picking PV was crazy because they've never historically been good. But for me, I would say Jackson State and FAMU would be the two that I would definitely pick. And then that third one would be so tough for me to pick. But I think Jackson State and Florida A&M, FAMU would be the two teams that I would pick to move up to a CUSA or a Sun Belt. I personally think that would be the move, especially if you really want to kind of ride this wave of media coverage, ride this wave of hype that you have right now surrounding your program. I don't understand why you would try to fight it and stick it out in the FCS level. But Underscore, if JSU, PV, Alcorn, FAMU are offered a spot by the conference, I think it would be dumb by any AD or president of that university to say no. Because when you look at JSU and FAMU, they have the fan involvement, they have the attendance, they have the stadiums. I believe FAMU is building a new stadium within the coming years. Y'all can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's who I'm pretty sure that's the I saw like some renderings of it or whatever. They're building like a whole new thing. So for me, those would be the two programs that if you got offered, man, like why would you ever turn that down? And so we'll have to see about that. Underscore said Big 12, they're bugging out. Coach Simmons, they have to hold 15,000. That is true. JSU does average more fans in the Sun Belt. Also a fact. Underscore said I like JSU, but they're not Big 12 good. Coach Simmons says, hell, look at Vandy. Vandy needs to come to the SWAC. I don't think Alcorn's ready. They barely have an athletic trainer. That's true. So the biggest thing, Lawrence, too, and this is something that no one really talks about. Everyone always talks about on the field performance when it comes to moving up, but also like look at the infrastructure of these programs. I mean, really and truly, y'all can let me know in the comments which SWAC programs have the infrastructure to not only move up but sustain the move up, because it's super easy to try and move up and do it for a few years, pull in Idaho, go to the FBS, get your what rocked, find out that you weren't ready and have to drop back down. And then it messes up your whole timeline over again. So for me, the number one question I would have on teams that you have to have the infrastructure, the attendance, the team, the coach, the hype, the smart AD, the president that's invested. All these things have to come together for a team to move up. And I just don't think that's a conversation a lot of people are having. A lot of people are just like, look at the talent, look at this, look at that. It's like, yeah, okay, that plays a small role. But also, what about all these other things you have to have line up? And right now, I honestly think FAMU and Jackson State are the only two that I would say for certain have a realistic shot of succeeding if they tried to move up right now. And that's just my opinion. Coach Simmons says you can't take Southern without Grambling. I'll agree with that. Yeah, I already got Coach Simmons. I learned my lesson by saying they should move the Bayou Classic. So we'll just leave them together in the SWAC or whatever conference they want to be in together. Underscore JSU is also building a stadium, and from the rendering, it looks really damn good. Yeah, I mean, okay, so underscore. I mean, let's be honest. That the AD, Dion, all of them, they weren't ever going to let some crappy stadium be built. It was always going to be top of the line. They understand what they have to do. I would like to know how much it holds too. Is it going to be as big as the Vet is at almost 60,000? Or are they going to try to lower it to like more 45, 50,000? Are they going to try to make it more personal and everything? So we'll have to see about that. I'm really interested to see what they're going to make the capacity of that, and what are some of the other factors that go into that. So I definitely need to look up those renderings and kind of find out what they're doing. And also could be way further in the process that they decide that. Coach Simmons says is at 40K. That's what I would imagine. I see, because the 60K stadium, I don't see that being really an FCS staple. But if you make a 40,000 one, you become more personal, and you can also say you average a sellout each game at that point, because hitting 60K is really, really, really tough. I'm just going to be completely honest with y'all. That 60K is a lot to fill up, especially at the FCS level. When some weeks you got to play like an 0-7 team. But we'll see on that. EA wouldn't be surprised if the OVC attempts to get A&M or Bama State to join them. You see, like EA, the only thing I would say about that is if you start having SWAC teams, so because we've already talked tonight about Jackson State FAMU potentially moving up. We talked about the Southland already offering Texas Southern and PV a membership into the Southland. If that happened and A&M and Bama State went to the OVC, I mean, you would be talking about the entire conference pretty much dissipating if all those things kind of happen. So I wouldn't be surprised if the OVC attempted it. I would be extremely surprised if A&M or Bama State accepted it, if that makes sense. I can't see them wanting to go to the OVC, especially when you look at how many teams have already left the OVC. Now, if the ASUN came calling, I think you would have to take it, because the ASUN is just that much. That's going to be a powerhouse conference in the coming years with Jacksonville State, with Sam Houston, with Central Arkansas, all these teams that are consistently in the playoff race. I think the ASUN would be one you couldn't turn down, but right now you can make an argument within the next 3 years that the SWAC is going to be above the OVC, especially since they've lost most of their really, really good teams. So for me, I personally think A&M and Bama State would be there to stay. They'd probably turn down the OVC, but man, that ASUN would be a tough thing. That would be super tough to turn down. James Little, can you guys look at my 14 parlay? Send it in the chat. Okay, you've already said it. Hang on. Texas plus 13.5, Iowa plus 5.5, UCF -4, and Michigan -1.5. Hmm. James, I really like the Michigan bet, and I really like the Texas plus 13.5 bet. Now, Iowa UCF, that's going to be real close. And I don't remember who UCF plays off the top of my head, but I definitely think you have something in the Texas and the Michigan bet. Those definitely should hit. Bud said that's not in stone yet, talking about the JSU stadium. EA said he don't think they would take the OVC bid either. Underscore said, can you see JSU beating any of the actual top 25 teams minus the Ivy Leagues? Oh man. Yes. So underscore, I definitely think they can beat some. Let me pull up the top 25 real quick. Let's see. So right now, Jackson State's 20 in the FCS polls. When you look at anyone behind them, I think they would have a good shot to win. I think their toughest test at the backside of the poll would be Incarnate Word due to the quarterback that I talked about earlier in Ward, who's arguably a dark horse for the Walter Payton Award. And I also think South Dakota could give them a run for their money, but I think Jackson State will still win that game. So I think they could beat any of the teams behind them in the polls. Listen, you say excluding Ivy League, Princeton is no slouch. I mean, Princeton has a very, very good team this year, but I still would take Jackson State over Princeton right now. And let's be honest, underscore, I personally think they can compete with anybody. Now, where they would run into trouble, looking at the polls, would be 12 and up. I think they can compete with a ETSU. I think they could compete with a UT Martin. I think Sacramento State, Northern Iowa, Missouri State, VMI, all those teams from like 13 back to where Jackson State's ranked. I think Jackson State will be just fine against any of those teams. It could compete at a high level and possibly even beat a lot of those teams. Now, when you get past that point, that's where those teams are built to compete with Jackson State because they have the exact same type of athletes, and they all have, and most of them have really, really solid quarterback play, which is something that Jackson State hasn't really been pressured with as a quarterback that just had an elite game against them, and that's credit to the defense. But when you look at a Sam Houston, you look at a North Dakota State, a Southern Illinois, who's third in the country, a Villanova, a James Madison. Those teams are going to give Jackson State a lot of problems in any type of matchup, regardless of where it is. Now, the matchup that I would want to see underscore, and I think anyone in here who watches a lot of FCS football would agree, Eastern Washington versus Jackson State, that would be my dream matchup. Listen, I don't know who I got to call, what strings I got to pull. That would be the matchup I would pay $1,000 to watch on any channel you wanted to put that on, because you would have, my opinion, the best quarterback in the FCS against this Jackson State defense. It would, if Jackson State beat an Eastern Washington and did what they have to every single quarterback they face to an Eric Barriere, you're talking about, listen, I will eat every single word I've ever said poorly about Jackson State on the show. That would be that would be a statement game. And I mean, yeah, you even said it. EW's quarterback is good as hell. I mean, there is not a better quarterback in FCS than Eric Barriere. So for me, that would be a matchup I would pay to see. But when you look at some of these teams like a UC Davis, a South Dakota State, who Chris Oladuncan, who was committed to FAMU, decommitted once South Dakota State was in the national title. We had him on the show. He is legit at quarterback. He's a 6-year guy. He's not going to be rattled by anything he sees. You even look at a Kennesaw State, that triple option, that option running attack that they bring on top of a top 15 defense that they bring in would give Jackson State a lot of problems on the offensive side of the ball, I feel like. So I think 1 through 12 is where Jackson State would really get some real competition. And that's where I could see them really struggling in the playoffs. And that's why I've always said on this show, as much as everyone wants to label me as a hater, Jackson State would absolutely win a first-round matchup in the FCS playoffs if they win. Now, going into the second, quarterfinals, things like that, that's where they would face teams that are way above any level that they've seen this season. I mean, guys, let me put it in perspective for you. The only top 25 team that a SWAC team has played this year is number 22. Incarnate Word is 22 in the country. And Prairie View, went and visited them. The Prairie View is the number 2 team in the SWAC right now. Number 2 or number 3, if you want to put FAMU. We're not having that argument right now. Prairie View is the top 3 team in the SWAC. Incarnate Word, who's 5-2 and number 22 in the country, beat them 41-9. 41-9 was the final score of that game. That's the type of talent that you're going to start seeing. And Incarnate Word was the top 12 team up until they got upset this week. But yeah, this is the problem for Jackson State right here. Sonic Boom put it perfectly. The offensive line, that's where Jackson State will lose the game. You look at a James Madison, the DN, Mike Green. Mike Green would have 4 or 5 sacks against that Jackson State offensive line. You look at a Kennesaw State, they got 3 or 4 guys that I think would have huge games. You look at North Dakota State, who's got monsters at the line of scrimmage. I mean, there's a lot of talented D linemen that I think that's where Jackson State would really, really struggle in the playoffs. Let's see. Lawrence said JSU's not ready for that mountain yet. Nicholas Sharp said, yeah, we would lose a lot of the teams in the OVC. Bud said the defense would keep them in any game. I agree with that. Underscore, I think JSU needs to start splitting man and zone coverage on defense because I personally think they're better in man. Also believe JSU needs to start using their tight ends more if they want a better chance at the playoffs. Yeah, man. So the JSU defense, I just feel like right now, and this might piss some people off, I don't think they've had to really scheme, really. I mean, when you think of it, outside of Alabama A&M, where they just abused the offensive line and shut everything down for A&M, I mean, they haven't had an offense that I think can hang with them athletically, physically, talent-wise. I mean, they have had the talent advantage in every single matchup this season, and I think that's why they can just play whatever covers they want. It works because their DBs are better than you. And most of the matchups that they've had this year, they've had the advantage. I mean, and listen, I want to credit Jackson State secondary to shut Kamari Averett down for Bethune-Cookman like they did this weekend. I mean, that was one of the most impressive performances in the SWAC this season in terms of a defensive performance, to shut down one of the SWAC's leading receivers, a guy that nobody has had an answer for all season long. I don't think Everett got his name called all game long. I mean, he was forgettable this weekend, and so you have to give Thurman and that defense some major credit. But that's something to look for. Underscore, once they start, if let's say they find a way in the playoffs over these next few seasons, I'm interested to see what the defensive game plan and scheme would be against some of these offenses that they would have to face in the playoffs. Bud, do you think any team is close to J State in terms of what, like, just in the country? Because if you're talking in the country right now, so if I had my rankings just based on potential, like I said, I would probably put J State at like 13 right now. I personally think Jackson State is probably like right there, right outside. I would say they're a borderline top 10 team in the country. But you said the SWAC. No, I personally don't think there's any team that's going to beat Jackson State this year, and I've said that on my show repeatedly. I don't think there's a team in the SWAC right now that can compete with Jackson State on every level of every game. The only team I can see, that remaining that I can see them giving Jackson State any sort of trouble is Prairie View, just because of how balanced they are. Only team in the SWAC to rush for 1,000 and throw for over 1,000 yards this season in the SWAC. That's the only team. But the thing that I think Prairie View would have a problem with is Jawan Pass cannot throw over the middle. It's either deep ball or dump off, and that's not going to work against Jackson State. You're going to have to be able to throw those intermediate routes against Jackson State. And I think if Jawan Pass, catches a turnover bug against Jackson State, it could be ugly. And you saw what happens this past weekend when Jackson State's able to force turnovers at a very, very high clip like they did this weekend against Bethune-Cookman. So right now, I just don't think anyone right now is realistically going to beat Jackson State as we stand on October 26th. But as we know, college football, things change like daily, and all it takes is an injury here, a bad game there, and things could drastically change. But if Jackson State and any other opponent in the SWAC are fully healthy and fully executing, I don't think there's anyone in the SWAC right now, Bud, that I think can beat Jackson State as it's currently as it currently sits. Underscore, I think JSU has the depth of DB, but definitely not O-line and running back. See, that's not biggest frustration with Jackson State this year is like the lack of a run game. Man, you have so many athletes, and on paper, they should be able to run the ball against anybody in the SWAC. Outside of maybe FAMU or someone like that, or maybe even a Prairie View with, the interior guys they have. But there's no reason Bethune-Cookman should have won the line of scrimmage against Jackson State this weekend. They got absolutely shut down by Bethune-Cookman's D-line, and that to me, that was unacceptable. And I know there were some people in the comments who didn't like what I had to say about the offensive line, but I would like to hear y'all's opinion since we're live. I mean, that offensive line is too big, too talented, and now I've had too many games to play together to still be playing like they did this past weekend. And it's all more credit to Shedeur Sanders right now because of what he's doing with that atrocious offensive line. I mean, he's getting hit no less than 5-6 times a game minimum. Outside of the A&M game, that offensive line has played atrocious football. They are getting Shedeur Sanders absolutely killed. For Delta State to beat you at the line of scrimmage, I have no excuses for you. And, I talked to a parent of a player at Jackson State. I don't want to nix them or anything like that, so I won't name who. He was a defensive parent. He was saying that they just don't have any physicality. He was explaining to me how he gets so frustrated that they don't have that mean streak in them, and that they just don't go out there to dominate week in and week out like they should. They did it against Alabama A&M, but I'm going to keep it real with you. Alabama A&M's D-line isn't all world. But for me, the offensive line should be so much better, and it just frustrates me because on paper, they should be the best offensive line in the SWAC, and they're getting dominated week in and week out by defensive lines with no stars, no faces to the name. I mean, can y'all name one defensive lineman for Bethune-Cookman that it should be better than any offensive lineman Jackson State has right now? I don't think many people could, unless you're a Bethune-Cookman fan and you've got some secret name that I don't know about. But there's no reason for the offensive line to play like they have been. Sonic Boom said if Prom could bring in one more good class, this team could have almost as listen, Sonic Boom. Like I said, I'm trying to remember. I think it was last Mailbag. Someone asked me about that. I think it's going to take three. Well, let me put my other hand up. 3 classes for Jackson State to have a FCS title team. I really do. I personally think it's going to take 2 more classes, but off the one he just had to have a realistic shot to win the FCS title. And so that's perfect amount of time for them to figure out this whole should we go to the playoffs, should we not? Let Jackson State go in 3 years and they'll be one of the favorites to win the FCS title, because I think next year they're going to probably be ranked somewhere in between 20 to 25 to start the season. So they'll be preseason ranked, I would imagine, and it would give them the perfect opportunity to really make a playoff run. But we'll see if that happens. And I've been told, I don't have any SWAC hours, so I'll let the people with SWAC hours figure out how to make it work. But personally, I think Jackson State should go to the playoffs in a year or two and do their thing. Sonic Boom said, I'm not sure what is wrong with that O-line. Maybe some of these guys other than Gray were missing. Could it be the O-line coach, special teams coach? So Jackson State won't have a lot of coaching turnover unless, like a TC Taylor gets a head coaching opportunity somewhere or something like that. If I'm Jackson State, absolutely. If I'm Coach Sanders, I'm firing the O-line coach this year. I'm too talented. I have too much riding on this, and this team is too good to just let average play go unnoticed. Someone has to be let go. Something has to change. Okay, you meant strength and conditioning. Okay, I must have read that wrong. But yeah, for me, I personally think the O-line coach should go. I mean, when you have the type of connections Coach Prime has, you got to go get someone that you trust to really make a difference on that offensive line, because you have a lot of guys who have a lot of eligibility left that can really be developed over this next offseason. Because I'm just going to ask y'all in the chat to let me know, what would Shedeur Sanders' stats be if his rushing game was averaging over like 50 yards a game outside of the A&M game? What would Shedeur Sanders' stats be if he wasn't getting sacked 5 times a game? What would Shedeur Sanders' stats be if he didn't have to escape the pocket every other play? Or like this team has so much untapped potential, and it all comes back to that offensive line not playing up to their standards. So for me, I think the O-line coach and or the strength and conditioning coach has to go. But like a lot of Jackson State fans like to say, it's only technically like year 1.5 for Coach Sanders. So maybe they're going to give the offensive line coach a bit more leeway. But for me, I would absolutely make a move just because I think if you're Coach Prime, you don't have any time to waste. You have such a good team, and you're just kind of letting it go. You missed your opportunity to have an undefeated season because the O line didn't play well, and that's kind of where I sit. Lawrence said the offensive line is terrible. Buzz said they should be undefeated. O line play. He said 14 points should have won the ULM game. Contrarian said he's selling SWAC hours as the credit card info. Sonic Boom said he needs to go after a younger, fiery O-line coach. It was great to bring in all this experience the first time out, but TC needs a better O-line to work with. Absolutely. I mean, and you saw so the way I tried to explain it on one of the SWAC recaps is you saw the potential of Jackson State when they played Alabama A&M, when that O-line was clicking, when Shador had time to throw, when the run game was in sync. Everything what Jackson State could have been was encapsulated in that 61 point, blowout win over Alabama A&M. That's what Jackson State could be. But what they have been is definitely not that, to say the least. And they have way too much talent on that team just to let it go to waste. So for me, they got to figure something out. EA said A&M's defensive coordinator has to go. EA, I'm not sure his name. I am pretty sure. I'll have to look it up, and I'll let y'all know on my preview on Friday of that game. I'm pretty sure A&M named like an interim D coordinator this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. So I think they made a change already. That's going to be something to look for. But yeah, D coordinator's got to go. Listen, it if defensive anything's in your title at A&M, you got to go. That defense was atrocious. If there's O-line in your name at A&M, you got to go. Unless you coach the wide receivers, running backs, or quarterbacks, you got to probably go at A&M because everything was out of whack. Underscore said it's not the O-line coach, it's the players. Hey, it might be. And listen, that's what I was saying in the offseason is there's a lot of people who had a lot of stars next to their name that didn't turn out to be the players you thought. And it just could be that the Jackson State offensive linemen that they got just don't fit the scheme. They didn't work together. And you see, so I don't know how much Michigan State football you guys have watched in the chat because I don't know who's in here watching. They've run a 8 to 10 person rotation at offensive line this year at Michigan State. So what they do is each game they like ride the hot hand at each position, and they switch them around. So like certain guards will switch around, tackles will switch, centers will switch, and then by the end of the game, they have their best 5 offensive linemen go forth and play. Now Jackson State don't have the depth for that, I'm assuming, but that's something that you could look for and see. Maybe if I just made a small change here or a small change there, you could create some chemistry on that offensive line and figure out what your best 5 lineup is moving forward. Now, probably a little too late in the season, but that's something to look for next year if you don't want to make any changes, because Michigan State was real inventive with how they rotate offensive linemen. Because, the biggest thing that they usually say about O-line is they have to have that continuity and that chemistry. Well, Michigan State said, we don't care about that. We're going to rotate 10 guys week in and week out. And that's kind of been something that separates them from the rest of college football. But they have like 10 guys that have played like 200-300 snaps this season. And it's insane to watch if you watch Michigan State this year. Sonic Boom, I agree. I hate to fire a guy this soon, but Prime doesn't have time to wait and see if the coach is right. Maybe it is the players. The D-line wasn't living up to expectations at first either. That's true. You see, as sad as it is, and and as weird as it is to say, man, this guy needs to be fired, because it's weird saying that a guy doesn't deserve a job or the job he's doing. But for me, like you said, he doesn't have time to waste. The team's too good. The window in college football is way too small to be wasting time wondering, was this the right guy? Was that the right guy? I mean, if you're not performing at your job, you got to go. And Dion, I think, knows that. And with the hype that Jackson State is going, and Sonic Boom, you know this, with the hype that you have behind the program, what O-line coach could you call that you couldn't possibly bring into Jackson? And On top of that, could you get somebody who, let's say, is a better recruiter than what you have now? And who could he bring in? There's a lot of offensive line transfers that hit the market just because a lot of teams outside of, maybe Michigan State go with their starting five, and it's a seniority type of thing. And there's not a lot of opportunities for freshmen to get into that O line spot outside of, some teams were just beat down and how a lot of people leave for the draft and et cetera. So for me, Jackson State's got to make the move because there's no time to waste, like you said. Contrarian said it's not always the coaches. JSU be trying that already. Well, Contrarian, it has not worked. Listen, whoever played this weekend can't play next weekend because, the offensive line this past weekend had Shador running for his life and just got lucky that Shador can make the plays he could because they deserve no credit for what they did. I mentioned on the SWAC review, they averaged like what was it, like 0.6 yards per carry this weekend. That's not going to win you many games. And so that's where I think Jackson State really needs to improve if they're realistically going to try to compete for a championship. Underscore set at the start of the BCU game, 51 missed a block because he did kick block. That's not the coach's fault. He just looked like he stepped back really lazy. And listen, now, the A&M game was like the main game that they were like super fired up for, super motivated for, but maybe they just overlooked Bethune last weekend because offensive line played sparingly against Alabama State. There were times where they were able to establish the run and things like that. Maybe it was just they were overlooking BCU. This weekend is going to be a big telltale sign. If Mississippi Valley State I believe they play Valley this weekend. It just you can't lose. Yeah, they play Valley at early, but man, if you lose the line of scrimmage to Valley, that is the biggest. That is a huge step back for this offensive line. Jackson State should dominate Valley's defensive line because outside of one player, they don't have anybody who is better than any O line that Jackson State has on that roster. So for me, this is going to be a huge test for Jackson State as they get in that late schedule. Sonic Boom said, I agree at times with the O-line players really didn't seem ready or in shape. Could it just be too much to expect in the first year? If the new recruits do better, we'll know it wasn't the coach. Man, it's a big bet because Sonic Boom, the worst possible thing for Jack State is you don't make a move. The new recruits aren't better, and then you have the same O-line problem next year when you're expecting. Because, if y'all thought the expectations were high for Jackson State this year, just go ahead and wait till next year when people are expecting them to possibly make a run into the top 10. That's going to be real expectations, and you cannot have that same O-line problem going into the 2022 season. So for me, you got to try something if you're Coach Prom, and I believe you will. Contrarian thinks that Alcorn is going to get that big win. But listen, guys, I appreciate y'all tuning in. I'm about to hop over on Frankly Speaking Sports to talk all things college football. But as y'all know, y'all can catch the Mailbag right here on YouTube on 6:30 p.m. Central Time, live on Tuesday night. So make sure to tune in, turn on your post notifications so you know where to go for this show, and make sure to go submit your questions. You can hit us up on Twitter, you can hit us up on Instagram, you can hit us up on Facebook, and you can hit us up on our community page on YouTube. But before you leave, man, make sure to hit that like button. If you're new, hit that subscribe button. But guys, I hope y'all have a great Tuesday night, and I will see y'all later this week with some more college football content. But for right now, man, the Blue Bloods are out.